afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Foundation for a Healthy Kentucky's Health for a Change webinar, Collaboration as a Key to Success in 2020. My name is Rochelle Seeger. I'm honored to work here at the Foundation for a Healthy Kentucky as a Community Health Research Officer. I've been with the Foundation since 2013. The Foundation for a Healthy Kentucky's mission is to address the unmet health needs of Kentuckians. That picture for folks that are logged into the web portion of our webinar is from Pine Mountain in Whitesburg, Kentucky. We had the good fortune of visiting their Cane Kitchen and Apple Shop in June of last year. The Foundation's mission does its work by developing and influencing policy, improving access to care, reducing health risks and disparities, and promoting health equity. You can see all of the work of the Foundation for a Healthy Kentucky. A lot of it's posted to our website, healthy-ky.org. On the website, you can find the vision, the values of the Foundation for a Healthy Kentucky, reports, newsletters. You can sign up for our email list. You can also see the current focus areas under the Foundation's current strategic plan. Under this work of the Foundation for Healthy Kentucky are two health policy coalitions, and organizations such as yours are welcome to join them. These coalitions include the Coalition for a Smoke-Free Tomorrow, which advocates for policies to reduce tobacco use and exposure to tobacco emissions in Kentucky, and also the School Health Coalition, which will coordinate policies, practices, and programs to improve the health of Kentucky's children in the school setting. On today's webinar on coalition building was designed specifically as part of the School Health Coalition's coordination, and we send a special welcome to all of those engaged with us on this effort. Part of my work here at the Foundation for Healthy Kentucky is to coordinate these Health for a Change events. These photos you see are from some of our events that we held last year, in-person workshops in Whitesburg. We were down in Scottsville, Kentucky on the Howells Farm there in the middle picture. We partnered with a number of great organizations, the Louisville Free Public Library, Kentucky Injury Prevention Research Center, and Kentucky Center for Smoke-Free Policy. The archives of those events are on the Health for Change section of our website, events at Health for Change. On today's webinar, you can ask a question via the chat box on that computer there on the left-hand side of your screen that says Ask a Question, and those will come to us. This webinar is also being recorded, and it will be posted at that website, Events Health for a Change tab. You will also get the slides from today's webinar. My last announcement before we get started is please join us on February 26th. The topic of that webinar will be Practicing Health Equity in Kentucky, where we're honored to have the Foundation for Healthy Kentucky's endowed chairs, Dr. Matthew Bush and Dr. Karen Krieger presenting. Now, turn it over to our presenter for the day, Suzanne Smith. Welcome, Suzanne.
Thank you so much, Rochelle, and welcome to everybody that's on this conference call. Certainly a hearty welcome to my friends in Kentucky who are hosting this, and I want to thank the Foundation for their groundbreaking work in the state of Kentucky. If you haven't looked at their work, it's really amazing. But also we have 16 other states that are joining today, from California to Ohio to my home state of Texas. And so we welcome you as well to this webinar. We also are going to be archiving this, so if you're listening to this and not in the live version, we welcome you as well. So I have been really intrigued by the idea of collaboration since the very beginning of my work in the nonprofit space in 1994. And it's been something that is really the heartbeat of how we are very different than the for-profit space and really moves us forward as a community. But very recently, I think that we have seen a resurgence. You know, just like everything that's old is new again in fashion, it's the same way in the nonprofit space. And so you can't really go to a community meeting or a funder discussion without the word collaboration coming up. So one of the things we do at Social Impact Architects is really unpack those words and take those buzzwords into real definitions and real tools and tricks that you can use to make sure your collaborations are operating at their optimal value. Whether they're internal to your organization and you're trying to break across silos, or you're trying to work within a community or within a state and trying to lead collaborative efforts. So today we are going to be working through all those various elements that are going to be so critical to making your collaboration a key to your success in 2020. As was mentioned, we have a number of different questions that have been asked, and I really appreciate everybody who submitted a question in advance. I've read every single one, and what we're doing as a special feature is I will be answering those questions as we go, but there were a couple of questions that we're going to go into more depth after the seminar is over, so at 1 hour from now or 55 minutes from now. So if you want to stay on for 15 minutes afterwards, we're going to just have a healthy conversation about any and all that's on your mind that we haven't already covered, as well as additional questions that we got. In addition, you also have a chat function, and so for those of you who are familiar with webinars, you know that you can chat a question at any point. And I will also, while I'm on that slide, try to integrate it into the conversation, or we may take it at the very end in that last 15 minutes. So we want this to feel as much as if it's in person as possible. So just so you know, you're getting a ROI on this 1 hour investment, which I'm thrilled you made in collaboration. You're getting an investment of, for every hour you're spending today, you get 18 hours of benefit. So I put a whole lot of effort into thinking through how collaboration can best come together. So as many of you may know, I was lucky enough to attend business school at Duke, and one of the things I did there while I was in business school is collect all these tools for my toolkit, and what we've been doing the last 11 years at Social Impact Architects is applying them to the social space. So I just wanted to kind of do a call out to all the great thinkers that are out there. I'm certainly standing on the shoulder of giants, and give you a sense of all the books that we've actually put into this and all the research that's gone into it. So the good news is you get to know all of this within 1 hour. So the first area that we were going to discuss is the why of collaboration. So why are we doing collaboration? Why is it the hot topic for today? And what is really about it? Next, we're going to be talking about the what. And so how do you go about thinking about collaboration? And so how do you form collaboration? I think the thing you'll learn there is not all collaboration is equal. And then we're going to get into the all-important question of how do we do it? And if the collaboration already exists, how do we keep that collaboration energized? And so we're going to be talking about all of that in our coming slides. So the first thing I always like to talk about is level setting people with where we are today. I started my career in the nonprofit space in the 20th century, so have a sense of really what's been going on over the past couple of decades that has brought us to where we are today. And much like the for-profit sector that has been accelerated through globalization and technology, so has the nonprofit space. And you'll see on this slide a representation of one of the different pieces that we think about, which is kind of the future of nonprofits and where are they going. Many of you may also be subscribers to my blog, Social Trend Spotter, and so we talk a lot about the future state of nonprofits so that we can best prepare the sector for the future. And I would say this is equally applicable to foundations as well as the government sector too. So if you think about it quickly, you know, it used to be in the 20th century, it was really all about mission, you know, and if you were doing good, that was good enough. Well, of course, now that we're in this data-driven atmosphere, it really is about the impact that you're actually creating. And so there's much more of a push around creating impact. When it comes to fundraising, it used to be that there were more donors out there, people who gave you the money and then kind of walked away and basically said, you know, we trust you to do the work. And that's kind of been flipped a little bit in that not only do they want to give their money now, but they really want to invest in what you're doing. And it doesn't mean a social return on investment where they get the money back, but it means they want to be intimately involved with what you're doing. So it's much less of a transactional relationship and much more of an involved relationship. So it sort of means that your donors are also collaborators in your model, and they want to be part of the collaborative effort of building what you're creating in your community. We also used to do a whole lot of programs in the 20th century, and those still exist in the 21st century, but we've added much more to our portfolio. Now we're doing collaborations, which we're talking about today. We're doing things like system change, and you see more and more nonprofits going into advocacy. And really making sure that we're creating system change at all levels. so programmatically to kind of from a policy perspective. And the last two, bootstrapped and risk adverse, I think this environment has shifted in such a way where there's a lot more ability for nonprofits to take risk. And there's a lot more ability for nonprofits to really get the resources they need in order to be sustainable. So how does this apply to kind of where we are relative to collaboration? So one of the big trends that we're seeing, and we call it ego thinking versus eco thinking, is really this movement to people doing work together. And one of the best examples I like is to go back in time and remember this 3D game that we all got excited about called Mousetrap. So probably many of you on the phone may remember this. And what was interesting about it is it completely rethought the idea around what a board game was. It was no longer flat. It could actually be three-dimensional. So using that analogy, one of the ways in which we think about the future and one of the ways in which we talk about where we think we're going relative to co-creation of the work that we're doing, not only with people in the community, but those we're actually serving, is this nice little illustration that we put together. So obviously, we can do our individual effort, and obviously there's people alongside us that are doing their individual efforts. So you see that the individual mouse are kind of looking at the maze, trying to figure out how to get through the maze, maybe what's on the other side, is it worth it to go through the maze, where's the cheese on the other side. So fast forward to today where there's a lot of conversation about collaboration. And certainly, we've been doing collaboration since the beginning of the nonprofit space, so it's nothing new necessarily, but it is something that is considered a premium within the nonprofit space right now, making sure that we're not duplicating services, making sure we're working together, making sure we're breaking down silos. So the middle representation really is about that. So how do we sit and have a conversation about maybe where the cheese is or what kind of cheese or how hard the maze is? And so it's really the mice coming together as kind of a cooperative in many ways. Then you really see this advanced philosophy, which I think you're going to find is kind of the next evolution of collaboration, which is called system change. So instead of them talking to each other, they now are standing on each other's shoulders and they're becoming one unit. And there's the one at the top, the mouse is kind of writing down notes. And you can imagine after this, they're going to be having a conversation of, here's how we go through this together. Or maybe this maze doesn't even need to exist. Maybe we reinvent the maze. Maybe we're at a time now where the maze shouldn't exist. Maybe it's too difficult for our clients to get through. So those are some things to think about as we talk about the future. And that's really what today is going to be about, is what is the current state of collaboration and what are some of the best practices to really up your game so that way you do, like the mice on the last slide, are really having a unified structure that really allows you to create system change. So the what. So let's talk about collaboration. It's one of my favorite topics. It also is one of the things that I think is very difficult to do. I think there's a lot of discussion about doing collaboration and talk about collaboration, but not necessarily how it goes into it. So let's talk about the details of it. So first, it's important for us to have a definition. And I really want to emphasize this definition because I've spent probably 5 or 6 years crafting it. And so what is it? So breaking this down, it's 2 or more organizations. And I want to note that I said organizations because it could be government, it could be corporations. I hope you're doing collaborations with corporations, working together in a meaningful, well-defined, and deliberate manner. And you'll see why that's so important when we get to the how. By investing time, energy, and resources, so we're going to talk about what those are, to accomplish a shared objective or objectives. So they have to be agreed upon in order to do that are mutually beneficial to advancing the missions of the organizations involved and that are more likely to be achieved together than alone. So what I tell people, and we got a great question on this, is when do you collaborate? So essentially 1 + 1 = 2. But in collaboration, 1 + 1, or however many people in the collaboration, has to have a multiplier effect, where in this case, 1 + 1 should equal 3 or 4 or 5. And if your collaboration isn't creating that multiplier effect for your organization, you may want to rethink that or rethink how you re-energize that collaboration. And we're going to be talking about that very subject as we move forward. So I think probably all of us know why it's important these days to be talking collaboration and doing collaboration. It's really an expected behavior now. It also is an opportunity for us to build scale, so get to that system change, which I think is going to be the ultimate challenge of our sector in this decade. But I think the thing we underestimate, and I certainly think that funders, if you're listening, this is one of the areas that we underestimate, is that it's difficult, it's complicated, it's messy. And that 1+1 requires a whole lot of effort that's above and beyond the existing services that most nonprofits are actually providing. So it takes time and focus. It means that you have to understand how to manage conflict, complexity, and there's a cost associated with it. It really is a very different leadership muscle. So you can be a great leader of an organization, but for whatever reason, collaboration just doesn't come naturally to you. And so it does really require a different skill set, which we'll be talking about. The next thing that I always get interested in is when people use the word collaboration to really describe one thing. And one of the things we've learned from our research, and this slide suggests it, is that right now, I think when people talk about collaboration, they say all collaboration is equal. And what we found is that's not really the case. Not from my experience when I worked in the nonprofit space, and not certainly my experience today as I work across many different collaborations. So I want to walk through this just so you can kind of understand how we look at it. And I want you to visualize kind of collaboration as a vehicle. And so the first vehicle is networking. You know, that is a form of collaboration. You getting together with CEOs or people that are doing your similar job just to really share ideas, and have informal communications. That is networking, and that is definitely collaboration. But that's kind of the bike, you know, so that's a very early stage vehicle. And certainly it's a very effective way to collaborate, but it's definitely not a higher form of collaboration. So as you move up the stair step, that form of collaboration, of networking, could move into cooperation. So at a lunch, you could certainly say, you know what, I'm struggling with X, or I'm struggling with Y. And that CEO may say, you know what, actually, I can help you with that. You can refer to me and I can do that work. Or maybe that you could share an HR director, you know, or fundraising director. So that then moves to a higher form of collaboration called cooperation. And you'll see on the bottom, you're moving from more of an informal structure to a more formal structure as you go left to right. So then after that, you move to coordination. And coordination really is when you finally have an agreement on a joint need. So you both say, you know what, there's this need in this community that's above and beyond our work together, our existing work, and we really want to coordinate on it. So a good example of that is when 3 arts organizations come together, maybe during Arts Month, or health organizations come together during a specific public health month, and they decide to do joint marketing together. So when I was at the American Heart Association, we did a lot of this work with our fellow comrades at the Diabetes Association and the Lung Association, et cetera. So that's considered coordination. So you guys have a goal that is above and beyond the goals of your existing organizations, and you work on that goal together. The next is coalition. So there's lots of great coalitions out there, and the Foundation for a Healthy Kentucky has been the engine behind a lot of good coalitions. But that's where you get more formal, and you agree upon a shared means to achieve a goal. You usually come up with a vision for the group. It moves from being kind of more ad hoc, like coordination, to being much more formal. And you have formal leadership, you have a plan of action, and you share resources. But it's not so formal where you need separate infrastructure. So it's still kind of an opportunity for you to come together, but it's an ongoing opportunity for you to have a common agenda and agreed upon action plan. So it could be a coalition for advocacy, it could be a coalition around advancing public health, it could be a number of different things. Then you've got the alliance, which is really the big difference between a coalition and alliance is a legal agreement. So typically in everything from cooperation to coalition, you would do an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, which is a more informal document, which I know all of you are familiar with since you put those together with your grant applications. But this is more of a legal partnership that then has a fiscal lead. So there is much more formality. There's a budget associated with it. There maybe would be actually a staff person or somebody that is a contractor who's running the alliance. And you use it for all sorts of different things. So still you could use it for advocacy. You still could use it for various resources. But the difference is that you not only have a common identity, but you also now have a common strategy. And there's just that much more formality to the project. Then the last is integration, and this is where you get into mergers and acquisitions, and you've collaborated so much that the two nonprofit leaders who started on their bike now have moved to the Cadillac, where they're recognizing that they may be better, the community may be better served by them coming together. So you can see there's a graduated process to collaboration, and there isn't one that's better than the other, actually. People ask me, well, shouldn't we be at this level? The main thing I tell people is just know which column you're in and make sure everybody in the collaboration is in agreement that you're in that column. And that's the most important thing. So I'd encourage you as you look at your collaborations to really think about where you are in the continuum and making sure that you're in the right spot and everybody's in agreement on that. And we've got a couple of take-home exercises that'll help you with that in the next couple of slides. Then there's this new model that just recently came out called collective impact. And so it's a more complicated, sophisticated model. And so I tell everybody that is really the Cadillac model of collaboration, and certainly is very costly, but there's some real benefits associated with it. And oftentimes you have a backbone organization that kind of comes out from the existing collaboration, so it may be a new nonprofit or maybe a separate organization with staff underneath one nonprofit. But you'll see what they talk about here. And I'm going to flip back to the continuum, and you'll notice in the coalition and alliance area, those are possible collective impact strategies. And so I would just say, as you have a coalition or alliance, you could look at the literature of collective impact and actually apply some of those different learnings and best practices here. So I am finding also people using another word, which I find to be also very illustrative, which is called collective action. And so that also is applicable in the coalition and alliance area. So you can have the more formal structure that is formally collective impact, or you can have a collective action, which is a little bit less formal. And you don't have to follow these specific stair steps, and you don't have to have a backbone organization. So it's really a choose your own adventure associated with it on that. So one of the questions we got, and I always get this question, is the issue of competition in the social space. And I think it's interesting that we talk about competition and we talk about it in terms of, similar to the for-profit space. And one of the things I like to think about when it comes to competition is really how do we go about what we're doing, recognizing that we're really competition with one another. We're competition for donor dollars, for volunteers, for board members, but it's in the best interest from that ego-eco thinking, moving from the ego to the eco, for us to cooperate, that we really go beyond the old rules of competition and really think about how we get the advantages of both. So competition really is about the best thing that you do, and then cooperation is letting everybody be their best and making sure that the best comes out for the community. So that's one of the reasons why I love the word coopetition, is it because it lays the gauntlet down saying, yes, we are competitive, but we're coming together to really operate under the best interests of the social space. So there's a concept that Jim Collins and I think Peter Drucker also talked about this in his book, but in Good to Great, Jim Collins talks about the hedgehog strategy. And I don't have time to go in why it's the hedgehog concept. You can look it up on your own on Wikipedia. It's a little funny story. But essentially what we think about when we think about hedgehog is really what your sweet spot is. And for every organization, every strategic plan you ever should do, you should always know what your sweet spot is. What were you uniquely conditioned to do, from the very genesis of your organization, but also where you want to be now. So it really needs to be the thing that you're the most passionate about, also the thing that you're the best at. So I think you have to have a really good conversation with yourself about internal resource and saying, are we the best at this? And then what drives your economic or resource engine. So that's the concept that Jim Collins is bringing in from the for-profit space. I would say in the nonprofit space, the best way to describe that is, what can you get money to do? And that's your economic resource engine. Where is there demand in your community for something? And so you really want to be in that spot, and that's really called your sweet spot. And if you get asked to do things outside of your sweet spot, you get this. You get these other areas, things that you're passionate about and you're best at but can't get funded. Or you're passionate about it, but you're not the best at it. And so those are what I call your strategic collaboration opportunities. So we had a really great question that someone asked about, when should I know when I'm collaborating? So when is anytime you're not in your sweet spot. So the example I always give is, I was working with a runaway shelter who, through their research, recognized that they needed to bring mental health services on site. That it was really critical through trauma-informed care, et cetera, that they have a mental health provider on site to provide services when the young men and women needed help. And so they instantly said, oh, we're going to hire somebody. And so I challenged them on that and said, is that really what you're best at? And, will you be able to draw down Medicaid dollars to actually accomplish that? So is it in the best interest of the community that you draw down philanthropic dollars for that? Or is it in the best interest of the community that you use government dollars that already exist for that? And do you really think you have the internal capacity to do something like that? So we did a couple of questions around that, which I can share with you. But ultimately they were like, you know what? No, we don't know anything about mental health. We don't even know how to hire somebody. And yeah, we don't want to be a Medicaid provider. So instead of actually providing that, they went to one of their partners down the street that they did referrals to and said, do you want to come on site? We can give you an office, we can do this, we can do that. And they essentially outsourced mental health. And interestingly enough, that provider was like, absolutely, we can do that. We will bill for Medicaid. And it became cost neutral for the nonprofit that needed the mental health services, the runaway shelter. And then for the mental health organization, they got access to a population that's very difficult for them to get access to. There's not a whole lot of runaway youth that are going to be actively seeking mental health services, although they should. So really exciting work there, and I think that's a good example of where you should have some strategic collaboration areas. So just a couple of take-home exercises that I think would be potentially helpful for you. So first of all, this is a good exercise for you to look at your existing programs and services and actually looks at your Hedgehog concept. So where your potential collaborating need is and where your potential partners are. So that's one take-home exercise. The next one is to take all the existing collaborations you have and really think about where they are in the continuum, and are they supposed to be in that area? Do you want them to move from a bicycle to a Honda, or do you want them to be a Honda to a Cadillac of collective impact? So really just being purposeful around where all your collaborations are. So it gives you an opportunity to kind of connect the dots on all of those and say, are they all in the coordination phase? Are they all in collaboration or coalition? And that's a very helpful thing for you to know. And it's also a helpful thing to share with your board so that they can create an inventory of all the collaborations you're a part of, and you can really figure out which collaborations mean the most to your organization. So I'm going to stop there and just see if anybody has any questions. I'm not seeing any right now, but before we move on to how, just think about those take-home exercises and think about when you could potentially do this. I found that this is a perfect staff retreat. This is also a great lunch and learn that you could potentially do. Many of you, I think, are asking whether or not you can have copies of the slides. These are all open source, so you'll get a copy of the slides, and you're welcome to run this through with your existing staff. So now we want to get to the how, and I think the how is so important, so I want to make sure we spend the bulk of our time on that. And because this is so important, I want to make sure we kind of talk about it in terms that make this kind of stick with you. And stickiness is a big part of learning. One of the things I have learned through both teaching nonprofit professionals, but probably even more so teaching as a professor at various colleges, is that most people walk away and only remember 20% of what they've learned. And so the more we do to actually connect it to something that is really close to the person, the better off we are. So it's after lunch, and I thought, let's have some fun with the how. And so we're going to be talking about collaborations in terms of our relationships. All of us are in relationships with our family, with our partners, in relationships with our community. And so we're going to talk about it in terms of that, and we're going to have a little bit of fun. So we're going to use as a lens this book called The Collaboration Challenge by James Austin. And I'm going to use his book, but I'm also going to kind of give colored commentary and some additional resources that we use in addition. There's a lot of people, and I think James would agree, that think that this 21st century is the age of the alliance. And there's all sorts of things we talked about earlier on that really, I think, speak to that. And for me, I think one of the missing links that we have relative to collaboration, and I think collective impact is a good example of this, is that we talk about the structure of collaboration. But the reality is that it's the behavior that drives successful collaboration far more. And think about it in terms of your friendships. If you don't know someone very well and all of a sudden they ask you to do something, how likely are you to actually do it? Not very likely. There isn't a trust there. There isn't a connection there. There isn't that implicit kind of can-do attitude that you have when you know somebody. But if your best friend tells you that they need something, no questions asked, you're going to do it. And so I think that most of our collaborative models forget this really important part around behavior. So I oftentimes joke with my clients that I'm part-time mechanic, part-time therapist. And so when you think about your collaboration, I definitely want you to think about the mechanics of what goes into a good collaboration. But in this presentation, we're going to be equally interested in the kind of the psychology of collaboration. What brings people together? What makes things successful? And how do we know when human beings actually are excited about the end deliverable? And so we're going to talk about both and in this presentation. And I've used this methodology now for the past 7 years, and I can just guarantee you that this is what works. I've worked on probably 24 different collaborations over that 7-year time period and practiced all these things. And so what you're going to be getting today are all the tips and tricks that I use with those collaborations with clients. So there are 5 steps to collaboration. So one of the questions we got were, what are the 5 questions you want to ask? And so I think this is a good way to frame it, is these questions I would want to ask relate to strategy. Is this collaboration on strategy for you? The next question is connection. Do you connect with somebody? How do you ensure fit? How do you generate value? And how do you manage the relationship? So we're going to start with kind of the relationship part of this. So understanding strategic collaboration is like if you're in a relationship, or let's say you're just going online to start dating, you figure out what you're looking for. Are you looking to get married, or are you looking with just having some fun? And you got to figure out, like, what are you looking for? So going back to Hedgehog, you need to really figure out, where do you want to collaborate? So do you want someone who has a full-time job and has kids? Do you not want someone who has a full-time job and kids? Those are all the things you need to think about prior to going into the situation. Then, of course, making the connection. As we talk about that, we're going to be talking about dating. So what happens on that first date? How do you continue to have that conversation to build trust? Ensuring strategic fit. This is when, if you'll remember back to your dating life, and you may be in this now, this is when you take the partner home to your parents and saying, okay, let's try out various scenarios. This is when you travel together for the first time, and do you travel well together? Generating value is you come together and you are now generating value for each other. So again, every relationship or every therapist that works with marriages will tell you that marriages that are successful are generating value for each person. Again, that 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2, but that 1 + 1 equals 3 or 4. The other person feels like they're getting so much more about the relationship than what they're giving. And then lastly, like, how do you stay married? How do you stay together? If you're in a funk, how do you get out of that funk? So we're going to be talking about all those steps, and just for fun and just for this to be sticky and to really stick into your consciousness, we're going to talk about it in terms of the all favorite kind of dating / marriage / staying together conversation. So the framework on slide 29 that Mr. Austin kind of talks about is this kind of overall things that you're wanting to think about, this collaboration scale. And so we have a take-home exercise that you can put through on this. And I think this is a great one for you to rate your existing collaborations. So in that previous take-home slide, you actually had an ability to chart them out and see kind of, are you in one category or the next of the continuum. This then takes your collaboration. So it's XYZ coalition. In this case, our example shows it's a high level of engagement. It's a low level of importance to mission, which isn't good. It's a high degree of resources. So you're spending a whole lot of time on it. The scope of activities are low, or maybe you feel like there's just isn't a lot going on in that particular coalition. Interaction is really low. I mean, people are starting to get disenchanted with it. The complexity for your organization is really high, and the strategic value is kind of low. So based on this, we would recommend that you sunset. It's not a collaboration that is having value anymore. And I think that's one of the things that people don't think about when they think about collaboration is, does it need to exist in perpetuity, or is there a time limit associated with that particular collaboration? Certainly when you get down to the form of coordination, there could be a time limit. And so you definitely want to think about that. So we've given you a take-home exercise for you to really be able to connect with. All right, so the fun starts here. So let's talk about making the connection. So I even put Match.com on there, and if you'll remember from your high school and middle school days, we used to pass around those notes and said, do you like me? Yes, no. And it's true in the nonprofit space too. We are consummate networkers. I think we all know each other. It's almost like we're our own small town in a lot of ways. And so you do want to kind of broaden your network and look at systemic searching. So in that Hedgehog concept, we really said to you, where are your gaps and where could your partners be? And so then you do some market research. If you're trying to look for a partner, think about who would be good. And look at at the beginning phase of your continuum. So for example, if you're that runaway shelter, where do you get referrals from? So maybe you need to do more collaborations with high schools. Maybe you need to do more collaborations with drop-in centers. Maybe you need to do more connection with therapists or other individuals that could be knowing of people who are on the brink. And then backward integration. So so thinking about the whole level of what you're doing. So what do you do after they're in the runaway shelter? Do you have transitional housing? Do you have strategies related to workforce and making sure they get their GED or their high school diploma? Or if they've already graduated, how do you get them into the workforce? And so all those things are really important. So as you look at collaborations fresh, you may want to say, where are there missing elements of what we're doing? So once you've found somebody that you really think that you have a liking for and kind of fits your criteria, you decide you want to date. And so it's just like dating in the real world. You got to figure out, who's the person who's going to take the lead on it. And then I recommend breaking bread, like going out for coffee, having a drink together, potentially having lunch, and really getting to know them as a person. So before you jump to here's what I need, really get to know the organization, maybe go on tours of each other's organizations, and really assess for fit and style because you may need them, but their style may be very different than yours. And so we've got to pay attention to that. You also want to conduct due diligence, particularly if you're looking at that higher form of collaboration like coalition and alliance. You want to make sure that the people that you're working with are people who are going to have staying power, that they have the capacity to actually do the work. And then you want to engage top leadership. So I see this all the time where people in middle management of nonprofits are the ones running coalitions, and then that leadership change happens. Or, for example, that middle manager moves and they move on. It really disrupts that collaboration in many ways with either, because the top manager who comes in may say, what's the priority for this? The board may know nothing about it and can't really put the resources behind it or don't think strategically it makes sense to put resources behind it. And if the person who's really the interface or the champion with the collaboration leaves, then the collaboration kind of looks to like, who do we need to talk to now? Like, what makes sense? Because there's a whole history associated with collaboration that goes away sometimes with that individual. That's why the connection part is so critical, both for the initial fit, but for the ongoing sustainability of the existing coalition or collaboration. The next thing is once you kind of hit that dating level and you're like, okay, I really like this person, I think that they're a great organization, you want to think about fit. And you want to say, okay, now let's have a conversation about how we could better work together. And if it's, networking or coordination, it could be 2 or 3 organizations coming together informally. If it's a more formal collaboration and you're saying, you know what, we need to create a coalition that, fundamentally shows the city and the county why social services in this particular area is so important, then you maybe want to think a little bit differently about how to go more into depth and more formal. And we're going to talk about how you do that. And so part of what you want to do very early on, rather than hitting the start button, is to hit the pause button and really get clarity around why everybody's around the table. And you want to try some things out. So you want to clarify your purpose. You want to say, why are we doing this? What are we trying to accomplish? Where do our needs overlap? How can we create that 1 + 1 = 3? Discuss your values. So what's really valuable to you? Do you need to still be able to fundraise? Or if the coalition goes out and fundraises, is it going to become competitive to your situation? And then how do decisions get made? Is it consensus? Is it majority? All those things are things important to talk about prior to even getting started, so that you start off with a shared understanding of why you're together. And this also gives an opportunity for people to say, yes, I'm signing up. And they know what they're signing up for. And they know what the amount of time is going to be, what the structure is going to be, and whether or not it really is a strategic fit for their organization. So this is, again, much like dating, but this is kind of when you're boyfriend, girlfriend, partner, and essentially you kind of decide, do we want to advance to marriage? Do we really want to accomplish this? And so it gives you an opportunity to really test the waters and make sure you're having those early on conversations so that there isn't confusion later on. So we said we were going to give you templates that we use with our clients, and so I wanted to share with you a couple of ones that I find have been really helpful. So day one of a collaboration, or people deciding they want to come together, we talk about success and what does success look like. So it's more of a visioning exercise. Then we talk about past experience. And you guys know this really well because we do this in trauma-informed care. What is our collective experience around collaboration? When did it work well? When did it not work well? What made it successful? What made it fail? And this is a bonding point for people, but it's also an opportunity for you to kind of unearth different things that are going to be important to you individually, but also collectively. And then, of course, the all-important one around outcomes. So what impact are we looking for? What's important to us? Do we want publicity? Do we not want publicity? Do we want to grow? So that there's some intentionality around what success looks like in the future. So we have this candid conversation, and we do it either as a collective or we do this individually with all the coalition partners. And then we come together at the next meeting and say, here's what we heard you say. Here's the points of agreement. Here are the points of differences. So that then they can celebrate those points of agreement and then discuss the points of difference. So this is really the macro level of things. Ways of working is the micro level. So how is this work going to all get done? So it gets into expectations of each other. When we start failing, what do we do? How do we manage conflict? What meeting guidelines do we have? Do we do doodle polls? Do we get together once a month? Do we do conference calls? Do we do in person? All those things should be decided ahead of time so that way you create a standard blueprint for your group, but then you can always revise it along the way. Do we share our work privately only? Do we have the Vegas rule? Can we talk about this publicly? How do we communicate to our funders? How should we give each other feedback? What happens when there's conflict? How do we manage it successfully? And then again, how do you make decisions? So I promise you, this sounds like a lot of upfront work, but you will save time in the long run by having putting these things on the table, coming up with a basic outline of how you want to handle this situation, and then putting it in a charter and saying, this is how we're going to work. So for every collaboration meeting, I always put these in front of people so that they remember what it is. It also helps when you add new coalition or collaboration members to your group because then they know exactly how they're supposed to operate. We also are a big believer in making sure that meetings operate well. I have to tell you, I'm getting more and more frustrated with how badly we're actually doing meetings these days, both in the for-profit and nonprofit space. So don't be one of those people that has meetings that just go on and on and on, and there's really no point to them. So the first thing we do is establish ground rules. And so we've got some ones here that we use and are kind of some ones that you can take from. And we've also given you an example of one that we put together with a coalition that we worked with in the city of Garland here in Texas. And they actually have it on their agenda. And you can see the activity plus behavior in there. Then, as I mentioned, I do feel like we're at death by meeting by these days. And I do think really thinking about your meeting agenda is so key to being successful as a collaboration. And I just want to reinforce that because I just think that we are really victim of setting up meetings and really spending time just getting everybody in a room together, but then we don't spend time in the equal amounts of time, if not more, figuring out how do we make that valuable time successful? How do we do things that really make it successul? We've got a blog here that is at the very end. We'll give you those links that really get to how do you have an energetic meeting. But part of the goal here is creating clarity. So making sure everybody knows coming into the meeting what's expected of them, what the outcomes are supposed to be. I personally love pre-reads before meetings so that you can put a lot of stuff on the consent agenda and people come in and use meetings for what they're supposed to be, in-person interaction, strategic conversation. There needs to be a bonding moment within those meetings. So I do a lot of bonding in the various meetings that I do, and there's things you can do super quickly, like 1 or 2 minutes, that really bond people together. And then also being very consistent. So I'm a big fan of having a meeting calendar and having consistent meetings and putting them out there and having real conversation. And so that's also an opportunity. And then I always end with a 1-minute checkout where everybody gets a chance to kind of talk and debrief about the meeting itself. So again, we go into this in detail in that blog, and just I encourage you, if you feel like this is one of the areas that you could improve for your existing coalitions, or for that matter, your nonprofit, take a look at it, just upgrade just a little bit, try some new things and see if you get some improvement as a result. Growing together. So now this is the next thing around how do you come together, but then how do you grow together? And so these are some things I wanted just to cover because I do know many of you are in part of existing coalitions and you probably are wondering, so how do we grow together? And there's also true internally within you as a nonprofit. So there's a lot of groups that get together where it's executive team members, it could be a staff meeting, all of those are points of collaboration. So let me share with you some of the things that I find to be the tricks of the trade around really growing together. So real briefly, it's conducting shared visioning, and I'm going to share with you an example of how you potentially could do that. I'm a big believer in quick wins. People have to see the results of their work. Otherwise, they're going to start being disengaged. Also doing regular continuous improvement. So how are we actually doing? So if you're not asking people how the meetings are going, how the coalition is going, and doing some type of assessment, we'll be talking with you about how you could do that. And then also spend time talking about the budget and risks to collaboration, because I do think we have to talk about that and make sure we're paying attention to when collaborations can kind of start going downhill and potentially proactively making sure that doesn't happen. So this next section really gets to some different things I just wanted to share with you to really think about all those things. So first of all, one of the big ones that I do is a thing called ecosystem mapping. And I actually presented this a couple of years ago at the National Governors Association, as well as the National Conference of Mayors, the National League of Cities. And so it's a process that I think is the next evolution of asset mapping. So assets really get to what exists today. Ecosystem mapping goes backwards and says what should exist today and what don't we have. So you can see that the step is really to think about your ideal structure without really thinking about who's doing it or what's actually available. So it's kind of a design thinking thing where you just open up to all the possibilities. Then you map existing assets to really figure out, do we have all those things? And then where are the gaps? Where are the things that are missing in our continuum or in our system? But what are also the collaboration opportunities? So is there some duplication, or is there an opportunity for people who are duplicating in different geographic areas to better collaborate? And then you find the findings and you take action. If you're interested in this, we have a blog on this, and I can certainly share with you some of the different projects we've done across the country on ecosystem mapping. The other one, when you grow together, I think it's important to reference Kotter's principles related to change. Anytime you bring people together, it's important to tell people why and what the level of urgency is. Then really figure out who that guiding coalition is, define kind of what the vision, strategy, and timetable is, and also recognize that you have to keep recommunicating it to your leadership, recommunicating it to the people involved, and then really inspire broad-based action. And so I think it's really important that you actually reward people for the right behavior and get those short-term wins. And that's when the change becomes anchored either in a community or in an organization. So it's an important thing to kind of really remember how we as humans best change. And these are the signals that we get, and these are the kind of the things that actually allow us to track change over time. So we don't see change as a bad thing. We see change as kind of an inevitable thing and something that we're getting used to. So next, we want to generate value. So you're together in this marriage, and you want to make sure that both individuals or all of the people together are creating value for each other. And value is such an intangible thing, and so you've got to really make sure early on in the conversation, people get to express what their individual unit of value is. So in a collaboration that I recently worked with, one organization said, we're really small, so we want a lot of publicity around this because it'll help us with fundraising and help raise our profile. Another nonprofit that was bigger said, you know what, part of what we want to do and the value that we want to create is we just see a ton of duplication in the community, and we want that to be fixed. And to the extent that we can help with that, we want to create it. Another person in the room was like, you know, we want to have access to additional funding because we feel like there's a whole lot of things our clients need, but we can't provide it, and we want to make sure that there's funding to support that. So each of them had different reasons why they were part of the collaboration, and those are important to document because it's not enough to create collective value for a collaboration to exist. You have to actually have individual value for the individual organization. And you have to have that value change over time. And speaking of time, I always like bringing up Tuckman's stages of development. You guys all know it by forming, storming, norming, and performing. So if you have an existing collaboration, I would highly encourage you to figure out where you are in the continuum. And certainly if you're in the storming phase, you kind of know what to expect. But you also need to navigate towards norming. And just so you know, we also have updated this, and we're going to be doing a future blog about when are you in decline? Because this right now is a straight line, but it's very easy to go from norming and have a leadership change in a coalition and go back to forming or go back to storming. So it's not a linear process as much as it is a windy road. And you can go backwards sometimes, and you have to kind of restart the engines a couple of times in order to get it back on track. So just know this is a really great tool that you could potentially utilize. So managing the relationship. So this is the last one. So this is you're in the marriage, you're together, you're rowing the boat in the same direction, hopefully, and you just hit some road bumps. And so those are all things that just happen. You know, that's part of Tuckman's stages of development. So managing the relationship gets to a number of different things, and I want to briefly mention those so that you can go deeper if you so choose. And this is kind of the list of some of the different things that I think are important. The first and foremost is trust. And hopefully you've read the book, Speed of Trust. And if you haven't, let me know, and I'm happy to share with you kind of a book summary we've done on this. The most important part of trust, and this is something that I think blew my mind when I read the book, was the degree to which others can trust you is no greater than how you trust yourself. And that has to do with your organizational trust, but it's also the person that you're putting into that role. So if you're not putting a decision maker into that role, where they can make decisions in that collaboration, you could be getting a trust issue. And so it's very important for you when you're in this collaboration to have a high degree of trust, both in your character, but also your competence. And I would also add your level of consistency. So that's how trust is built. And certainly you guys have lots of good information on trust. But I encourage you, if you are struggling with this one, this is a great read. This is a great lunch and learn for your staff, and I think it'll also help you with your clients as well. How do you build trust with clients? So people always ask us, like, how do you measure collaborations? How do we potentially know what we're doing? So one of the measurement tools that we really like, and it's right now open source, is called the Wilder Assessment. And you can see an example of a coalition we were working with. in 2013, where we did a baseline score in 2014, and then in 2015 we asked them the same questions. And they're all the things we've talked about here: unique purpose, shared vision, mutual respect. And these are all things where we've then charted it, and we say, okay, you know, in adaptability, you've gone down. In open and frequent communication, you've gone up. And there were some very specific goals that we made for ourselves in 2014 that then we got to see how well are we doing in those areas. And so it's just a basic assessment. So I definitely encourage you to check out the Wilder, and certainly it's a very great tool for you to track how you're doing over time and to set some goals. So in conclusion, here's kind of a couple of different thoughts that go into kind of the guidelines that Mr. Austin actually put together. And these are all the things that we think go into creating a great collaboration. And as I said before, if you think about it in terms of like a dating relationship and going to marriage, I think that that will stick with you. And as you start new, you know what to do. Like, you know, you have to spend more time with each other. You know, you've got to break bread. You know, you have to build trust. As you kind of move into that, you know, boyfriend, girlfriend, partner relationship, you're really having good conversations about fit. You've had your first conflict. Do you manage that conflict successfully? And if you're now in a marriage, you're in that collaboration, you've got to now test certain things. Figure out where you are in the collaboration. Is it starting to be kind of obsolete? You know, do you need to refresh the collaboration? Do you need to sunset the collaboration? Those are all things that you need to be thinking about in order to make sure you keep that collaboration interesting and exciting and also impactful for the community. I oftentimes tell people that people come together related to the mission, but they stay together, one, because they enjoy it, but two, because they see results. So if you start seeing people not showing up for coalition meetings, my observation would be that they're not enjoying it enough, they're not getting enough value out of the meetings, and then probably you're not getting the results in the community that you once did, or the prospect of results no longer exists among the people there. And just for fun, I put together kind of collaboration commandments that kind of bring together all of the how of collaboration. Basically means that I hope you, when you think about collaboration, you're more intentional about what collaboration actually means, and get beyond the buzzword to really how you actually do collaboration. Thou shalt value collaboration individually and collectively. Remember, people are coming together for the collective goal, but they always have individual goals that they're trying to meet through that collaboration. So being mindful of both of those and putting those on the table early on will save you a whole lot of time and effort. Honoring thy competition, recognizing that we're all in this for the greater good, but we also have our individual swim lanes, and really having good conversations about what those swim lanes are. The beauty of the nonprofit space is that in theory, we should coexist. We should be able to be in our own swim lane and allow clients go from one swim lane to the other swim lane, the other swim lane. And we can actually do as much as possible to create a system, just like those mice in the maze, that is as easy for our clients to navigate as possible, so they don't feel frustrated by the system or held back. And then lastly, I think this is important for everybody: seek first to understand, then to be understood. So it's all about putting in the work and making sure that you're there for that. Last but not least, as I mentioned, I have a weekly blog called Social Trend Spotter. We now have been doing this for 8 years, and so we have lots of blogs that cover many of these things at a deeper level. So things like coopetition, charters and ground rules, how to do good meetings. And so if you want to go explore a little bit more, feel free to check those blogs out. And if you like what you see, please feel free to sign up. We actually had a great blog today on behavioral economics in the social space. So you get those in your email inbox every Thursday. And so if you're interested, you're certainly welcome to sign up. All right, I'm going to turn it over to the Foundation for Healthy Kentucky, who had the foresight to put something like this on, and I'm just honored that they asked me to share my thoughts about collaboration and my tips and tricks that I've learned over the last couple of years.
Thanks so much, Suzanne. This is Rochelle Seeger again with the Foundation for a Healthy Kentucky. And there on your screen, you see my little dog, because this afternoon I will be sending you a survey via your email. It's a post-event survey. I would love for you to give feedback on today's Health for a Change webinar. Very importantly, I'd love for you to suggest future topics. This training series, Health for a Change, was launched by the Foundation in 2001 to support organizations across the state of Kentucky who are doing just this thing, to collaborate and improve the health of all Kentuckians. So I want to support you in this effort, and it's a very short survey. It will only take you 3 minutes. That will be in your email box. We have reminded you that a recording of the webinar and the full slide deck will be available to you very soon. I'll make that available on the Health for a Change website, and I'll send you that link via email. Don't forget to join the Coalition for a Smoke-Free Tomorrow if you're interested in joining that. Health for a Change website is healthy-ky.org, events Health for a Change. I know Suzanne mentioned that she's able to stay on the line some extra time today. So please, if you're able to stay on and your schedule allows, please stay on for continued conversation with Suzanne. If you aren't, because your schedule is tight, I thank you for joining us today. I'm here at the Foundation for Healthy Kentucky to support the work that you're doing across the state. I'd love to hear from you about how we can work together. I'm going to turn the call back over to Suzanne so we can continue our conversation about collaboration. Go ahead, Suzanne.
Great. So we actually got some questions that I was not able to cover in the actual presentation. So we thought we'd take it in this last 15 minutes. You're also welcome to send me detailed questions about your experience. And I will follow the Vegas rule, and I won't tell who's actually asking the questions. So this is your opportunity to challenge me with your toughest collaboration issues that are going on. So real quickly, before I do that, I do want to thank the Foundation for Healthy Kentucky for allowing us to do this. They also did a fantastic job of getting these questions in. There's a couple that people asked that I felt like I wanted to go more deeply into since we have a little bit of additional time. There was a great question around co-leadership of collaborations. And so as you know, oftentimes it is popular to have a coalition or an alliance be led by maybe someone that's in the nonprofit space, maybe a government leader, maybe someone from the for-profit space. And it's always challenging when you co-lead with somebody. So the tips and tricks that I have there, and I've probably experienced this, 30% of the coalitions I work with are co-led. Essentially, you want to divide by strengths. And so I definitely think having a conversation about where your strengths are and kind of where you want to kind of put more effort into. So typically there's someone that's a more visionary leader and is much better at the media, much better at like starting the meetings with a vision, and then there's someone that's much better at the operational area. And so that's one way to divide. I also would encourage those people to, again, break bread and really have a deep conversation about managing conflict. So from my point of view, I think it's hard sometimes when that conflict happens to know how that other person, to be mindful of managing that conflict without knowing how they like to manage conflict. So as we all know, individual styles range when it comes to conflict. And it's much to do related to their education and their experience. And so I think if you have a proactive conversation before the conflict happens about when we have conflict, what do we do? That is probably one of the most important things that you can actually do when you have co-leadership. So the next question that someone asked was, how do we actually bring young people into the conversation in the Q&A? And I love this question. I'm a professor myself. I'm always looking for opportunities for my students to do stuff in the community. I'm a very practically based learner. I think experiential learning is really important. In fact, our blog last week was about internships and the value of those work-based experiences. But essentially, I personally think you should attach yourself to a professor and figure out how you potentially could get some internships. I think it's probably one of the best opportunities that is out there is for a coalition to get an intern. And now internships kind of work differently where it can happen two different ways. One is through the curriculum. So right now I have project-based learning in my class this spring, and I'm searching actively for nonprofits that actually need help with something. And so a coalition would be a perfect applicant where essentially they're working with you on basic research. So maybe they help with scheduling, maybe they help with basic research, maybe you need a feasibility study done. That's perfect work for a student. There's also the opportunity for them to come work for you as an intern. And there are pros and cons to both of those, but I definitely think you should connect with your local university and really see it as an internship or a work-based experience opportunity. The next question that I got, and then I'm going to take the ones that are online that this may cover them, is that they wanted a little bit more in-depth conversation of how do you do this within your nonprofit. So I personally think that, collaboration is equally important within the nonprofit space and within organizations. I do a lot of work in strategic planning with nonprofits themselves, and one of the muscles that I do try to work on with them is their collaborative muscle internally. I will say that the more successful organizations bake that into their culture. It's one thing to say you want collaboration, it's another thing to show people that it really matters. So if it's part of your values, since it's more and more popular for nonprofits to have values in addition to mission and vision, I would encourage you to put collaboration or some type of value like that within your values. I also think you need to teach it. So similar to what I said earlier, you can't just say be collaborative and assume everybody knows what you mean by that. So you really have to teach something like this and say, this is what we mean when we say collaborative. I also think it's important to reward it. So you can reward it in two different ways. You can do it openly. When I was at the American Heart Association, they used to give team awards all the time. And they actually annually would have a team award. So you could get the top team award in different categories. And that sent us really good signals. And by the way, there was a financial reward too of like, this is what teamwork looks like. And different teams would vie to be the best team as a result. I also would encourage you to do it individually. So if collaboration is a big part of the job description and the competencies you're looking for from staff, as you know, most performance reviews now in the nonprofit space are both activity-based, but they're also competency-based. And we typically recommend a 60-40 split. So 60% is, are they achieving the activities? 40% are their competencies and capabilities in line with what is needed for this position. So if collaboration is a big part of their job, whether it's a fundraiser who needs to collaborate with programs or it's someone who's doing external affairs, you really need to make sure that you have a good evaluation structure to say, collaborative skills are really important in this role, and here's what this means to us, and how collaborative are you? So I do think that all of these skill sets can be brought into the internal space. Good meetings, good conversations, setting the vision up front, all of these things are equally applicable to internal collaborations as well. So those are a couple of the ones we got ahead of time. Let me look at the questions that we're getting online. How do I deal with 1 to 2 person decision makers, particularly when they have a viewpoint that's different than the group? I think that's the question that's been asked. So I think that's a very common thing to have happen. Leadership is a very isolated place to be. And so I think this is where I would encourage for there to be an open conversation about this. I do think that there's also preventative measures that I've shared that really prevent this from happening. If the group has come together on a united vision, in theory, the leader should be following that united vision. If they're not, then I think there has to be some conversations around, are they the most appropriate leader? Or in their defense, maybe they see something different than the entire group actually sees, because their vantage point is a much more close to what's actually going on. So this is maybe a point of clarification. So what I would recommend, I think, as a consultant, and I have the situation in one of the communities I'm working with now, is to potentially encourage a retreat to bring all the parties together and potentially recast the vision. And make sure that the vision that you had yesterday is the same vision you want to have today, because it could be a clarity issue, or it could be that the leader will have to recognize from that retreat that they may not be the right leader anymore. and that every coalition goes through life cycles, and the person who starts the coalition may not be the person who continues the coalition, or maybe they're more aligned with the previous vision and not their vision isn't aligned as much with where the coalition needs to go. So I think that's where the governance part of your coalition is so critical, and that you're governing it in the right way. The other thing I would say is not to fall victim to the niceness syndrome in the nonprofit space. I think oftentimes we avoid conflict, and then what happens by avoiding that conflict and not just hitting this head on with the individual is that then everybody's talking about it, and this person, there starts to be tension in the room in the meetings, and it gets in the way of the actual results of the group. So I would encourage you, if you start seeing issues, the executive committee or the people who are officers really are the ones responsible for dealing with it. So then I think you just have what I call a courageous conversation with that individual and say, you know, here's what we're seeing, here's what are you seeing? And really help that individual either recognize why their vision is out of alignment with the group, or help better understand why they have the vision that they do. And if you're really working at cross purposes, then you may want to have some type of graceful exit for that leader and be equipped to bring in a new leader who is more consistent or more capable when it comes to the new vision of the coalition. So it's obviously easier said than done, but I really recommend that as soon as you start seeing the problem, you address it as quickly as possible, but also proactively make sure that you're on track relative to vision so that the leader matches the vision, and you have the right leader in that spot for the vision that you actually have. The next question is, for the last couple of years, I've been the jack of all trades. I've been in the capacity of all the officers. How do I encourage more members to take an active role? I have worked to try to figure out what roles they want to play. So I think this is an interesting one because I find that oftentimes there are one or two people who actually are really stepping up and doing a lot of the work. And it's a really interesting phenomenon that a lot of researchers have actually done, where you end up having people who are very type A or very good at what they're doing. And what ends up happening in that situation is the other people just feel like it's getting taken care of, like I don't need help. That person doesn't need help. So I think that, I think you need to self-evaluate and really figure out what messages are you sending that could potentially be encouraging that behavior, and what maybe do you need to do differently moving forward. So maybe there's a sign-up sheet at the next meeting where you basically say, we've got an upcoming event and I need people to sign up for these other things. And I know what that means. Sometimes delegation is actually a lot harder than it is actually doing the work yourself. But by doing the work yourself, you're not really building a coalition. So really the main job of a leader is really coming up with the direction, co-created with everybody else, but then really delegating responsibility so everybody feels like they have bought into the outcome. And I know that's hard to do, easier said than done. But I do like your idea of the survey. I think that's really important. I also think you can create job descriptions and basically say, call the issue to carpet and say, look, it's not appropriate for me to be officers. It's bad governance, and you can throw me under the bus for that one and say, I just listened to this seminar, and it's not actually good best practice for me to be in every officer capacity. It doesn't look good to the funders. It's not a good way to operate. And we need to have people in these roles. And that will, I think, really kind of shock people into kind of the reality of the situation. And like I said, I think you're just going to have to take a step back and just see what happens. The other thing I would say, and I don't want you to underestimate this, is what I said about people come together for the mission, but they stay together because they enjoy the work and they see results. So I'd also encourage you to make this the most fun meeting that exists in the community, where everybody wants to be a part of this coalition because you have cookies or you have a way to come together that is really interesting and unique. You find out all the latest scoop about what's going on in the community by coming to this meeting. So think about what you can do that makes your coalition the coalition that is the most entertaining, the most enjoyable, but also is like the coalition that gets stuff done. You get the quick wins, you get the rewards, you get the headlines in the newspaper, and then you're going to be the person everybody wants to come to. And so then once you have that, you will naturally find people who are willing to volunteer. So I encourage both internally within organizations to have what I call a culture committee, but in coalitions, I do recommend a person who that's their full responsibility of kind of being the cruise director or whatever you want to call it, the director of fun, that really makes sure that coalition meetings are fun, entertaining, interesting, and get people's attention. And I think you'll stand out in that way, and I think you'll see over time more people take on additional responsibility as a result of your work. All right, that is the last question that we have. I want to thank again everybody who stayed on. Hopefully I've answered your questions to the degree that is helpful. If you have follow-up, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, and I'm very, very happy to actually, connect with you on whatever questions you might have. And certainly we'll be putting this online. So if you're listening online and you have additional questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me through my email, and I'm happy to give you a quick call or send you an email back with resources, or we can problem solve your specific issue. All right, thank you, Rochelle, and thank you, the Foundation for Healthy Kentucky, and thanks everybody for investing your time in the topic of collaboration today.